Welcome, everyone, to a deep dive into one of history's most chilling and impactful figures, Adolf Hitler. It's a heavy topic, I know, but understanding how an obscure, disgruntled Austrian postcard painter transformed into the absolute ruler of a major European power, bending an entire nation to his fanatical will, and plunging the world into unprecedented catastrophe, is crucial. It's not about glorifying him, but about dissecting the mechanisms of his rise and fall, the confluence of personal trauma, societal anxieties, and political opportunism that allowed such a destructive force to emerge. We're talking about a man whose regime resulted in the deaths of an estimated 40 to 50 million people, and who masterminded the Holocaust, the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims. This isn't just a historical account. It's a cautionary tale, a blueprint of how fragility, resentment, and unchecked power can combine to unleash unimaginable horror. Let's start at the very beginning with his early life and formative years. From 1889 to 1913, Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in Braunau am Inn, a small Austrian town right on the border with the German Empire. He was the fourth of 6 children born to Alois Hitler and Klara Pölzl, but due to the high infant mortality rates of the time, only Adolf and his younger sister Paula survived into adulthood. This fact alone, the loss of so many siblings, must have had some impact on the family dynamic, particularly on his mother. His father, Alois, was a mid-level customs official, a man who had worked his way up and was fiercely proud of his achievements. But he was also, by all accounts, a strict, short-tempered, and domineering patriarch. He demanded absolute obedience and frequently resorted to beating his children. Imagine growing up in that environment, under the shadow of a father who was both a provider and a source of fear. Then you have his mother, Klara. She was the polar opposite, gentle, deeply religious, and perhaps to compensate for the loss of her other children, she overindulged Adolf, shielding him from his father's wrath whenever she could. This created a stark contrast in his early life, a feared father and an idolized protective mother. It's a dynamic that can often lead to complex psychological imprints, a yearning for unconditional love alongside a deep-seated rebellion against authority. The family moved frequently because of Alois's promotions, taking them to Passau in Germany and then to Lambach and Leonding near Linz, Austria. Hitler attended primary school in Lambach, where he actually excelled academically and even sang in the church choir. This is a detail that often surprises people. The future tyrant as a choir boy. It shows us that early life isn't a straight line. There are moments of normalcy, even talent, before the radicalization truly sets in. But things took a turn in 1900 when he entered the Volksschule, a secondary technical school in Linz. His father had a clear path laid out for him. Follow in his footsteps, become a civil servant. But Adolf despised this prospect. He dreamed of becoming a grand artist. This wasn't just a childhood fantasy, it was a deep-seated ambition that clashed directly with his father's pragmatic expectations. In an act of rebellion, he intentionally neglected his studies, failing his first year and eventually leaving school in 1905 without a diploma. It's a classic case of adolescent defiance, but with profound consequences. Then, a significant event occurred in 1903. Alois died suddenly. This relieved the domestic pressure on Adolf, removing the domineering figure he resented. His mother, Klara, now free from her husband's strictures, allowed her surviving son to live a bohemian, leisurely lifestyle in Linz, funded by her pension and family savings. During this period, Hitler spent his time reading, drawing, attending the opera, developing a lifelong obsession with Richard Wagner, whose grand, nationalistic operas resonated deeply with him, and imagining grandiose architectural redesigns for the city of Linz. He was living in a world of his own creation, fueled by artistic aspirations and a growing sense of his own unique vision, even if it wasn't yet channeled into anything constructive. This brings us to his Vienna years, from 1907 to 1913, a truly pivotal period. In September 1907, Hitler moved to Vienna, the cosmopolitan capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, to sit for the entrance examination of the Academy of Fine Arts. The examiners noted his talents lay more in architecture than in painting, a detail that must have been a crushing blow to his ego. He returned to Vienna in 1908, tried the academy again, and was rejected a second time. Imagine the humiliation, the blow to the identity of someone who saw themselves as a grand artist. Compounding this personal failure was immense personal grief. In December 1907, his mother died of breast cancer. Her physician, Dr. Eduard Bloch, who was Jewish, later recalled that he had never seen anyone so thoroughly crushed by grief. This loss, coming right after his artistic rejections, left him utterly devastated and adrift. It's easy to see how a young man, already prone to resentment and with a fragile ego, could interpret these personal setbacks as larger indictments of the world around him. By late 1909, his funds were exhausted, and he entered a period of extreme poverty. He lived in flop houses and homeless shelters, including the Meldemannstrasse Asylum for Men. To survive, he painted postcards and watercolors of Vienna's landmark buildings, which were sold by a business partner, Reinhold Hanisch. This was a period of intense struggle, deprivation, and social isolation. It's important to acknowledge that many people experience poverty and rejection without turning into genocidal dictators. But for Hitler, these experiences cemented a sense of victimhood and grievance, a feeling that the world had unfairly denied him his rightful place. It was during these Vienna years that Hitler absorbed the radical political currents of the city, which would become the ideological roots of his later extremism. The multinational Austro-Hungarian Empire was a melting pot of ethnic tensions, a complex tapestry that Hitler, with his burgeoning pan-German nationalism, found deeply unsettling. He was deeply influenced by two prominent figures. First, Georg Ritter von Schonerer, a radical pan-German nationalist who advocated for the destruction of the Habsburg Empire and the union of all German-speaking lands. This resonated with Hitler's desire for a true German city and a unified German Reich. Second, Karl Lueger, the populist anti-Semitic mayor of Vienna. Lueger was a master of mass politics, and he skillfully used anti-Jewish rhetoric to mobilize the lower middle class. Hitler observed Lueger's methods, how he tapped into existing prejudices and channeled economic anxieties into racial animosity. He also read widely available, inexpensive pamphlets published by racial theorists like Lanz von Liebenfels, which promoted the supremacy of the Aryan race and characterized Jews as a biological threat to civilization. While Hitler claimed in his autobiography, Mein Kampf, that his worldview was fully formed in Vienna, historians generally suggest his radicalization was a gradual process that intensified later. But the seeds were undeniably sown in this period of personal despair and exposure to virulent, organized hate. Now, let's move to World War I and his political awakening, spanning from 1913 to 1920. In May 1913, Hitler left Vienna for Munich, Germany. He claimed he wanted to live in a true German city, but he was also evading military service in the multinational Austro-Hungarian army, which he viewed as corrupted by racial mixing. He was eventually tracked down by Austrian authorities in February 1914, ordered to undergo a medical screening in Salzburg, and deemed unfit for duty due to physical weakness, allowed to return to Munich. The irony is striking. The man who would later glorify military might and aggression was initially rejected for service. The outbreak of World War I in August 1914 provided Hitler with a defining purpose, a release from his aimless, frustrated civilian existence. He viewed the conflict as an opportunity for the German nation to assert its dominance, a chance to cleanse and unify. He eagerly volunteered for the Bavarian Army and was assigned to the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment, often called the List Regiment. There's a famous photograph from August 2, 1914, capturing a young Hitler amidst a cheering crowd in Munich's Odeonsplatz, celebrating the declaration of war. It's a powerful image of a man finding his calling in chaos. He served on the Western Front in France and Belgium for most of the war as a regimental message runner, a Meldegänger. This was a hazardous job, requiring him to deliver dispatches between headquarters and the front lines through heavy artillery fire. His comrades recalled him as an odd, solitary figure who did not smoke, drink, or talk about women, preferring to read or debate politics. He reached the rank of Gefreiter, or corporal, but was never promoted further, as his superiors felt he lacked leadership qualities. This is another crucial detail. The man who would demand absolute obedience from millions was not seen as a natural leader by his immediate superiors. Despite this, he was decorated twice for bravery, receiving the Iron Cross Second Class in 1914 and the prestigious Iron Cross First Class in August 1918. Remarkably, the latter was recommended by Hugo Gutmann, a Jewish lieutenant, an irony Hitler would later suppress and deny. He was also wounded twice, hit in the thigh by shrapnel at the Battle of the Somme in October 1916, and temporarily blinded by a British mustard gas attack near Ypres in October 1918. These experiences forged him in the crucible of war, giving him a sense of belonging and purpose he had never known before. He saw the trenches as a purifying experience, a test of national will. Hitler was recovering in a military hospital in Passau when the war ended in November 1918. The news of Germany's capitulation, the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, and the declaration of the Weimar Republic shocked him deeply. Like many German soldiers, especially those on the right, Hitler embraced the Dolchstoßlegende, the stab-in-the-back myth. This conspiracy theory claimed that the German military was not defeated on the battlefield, but was betrayed from within by socialists, communists, and Jews on the home front. These groups were blamed for instigating strikes, overthrowing the Kaiser, and establishing the Weimar Republic. The harsh terms of the 1919 Treaty of Versailles, which stripped Germany of territory, limited its military, and demanded massive financial reparations, solidified his radicalization. His personal trauma transformed into a fanatical political mission. He would avenge this perceived betrayal and restore Germany to greatness. After the war, Hitler returned to Munich. He remained employed by the army, the Reichswehr, working for its intelligence and propaganda unit. In September 1919, his superiors ordered him to investigate a small political group called the German Workers' Party, or DAP, led by Anton Drexler. Instead of finding a dangerous subversive group, Hitler discovered an organization that mirrored his own nationalist, anti-communist, and anti-Semitic beliefs. During a meeting, he spoke out against a proposal for Bavarian secession, impressing Drexler with his oratorical skills. Hitler joined the party as its 55th member. This was the moment his political career truly began, the moment his personal grievances found a public platform. Let's transition now to the rise of the Nazi Party. From 1920 to 1928, Hitler quickly became the DAP's chief propagandist. He organized large public meetings and discovered a powerful talent for public speaking. In an era of economic chaos, political violence, and national humiliation, his theatrical, high-energy oratory resonated deeply. He used loud delivery, dramatic gestures, and simple, repetitive messaging tailored to the frustrations of his audiences. Offering simple scapegoats, the Jews and the November criminals who signed the Versailles Treaty, for Germany's misery. He was a master at tapping into the collective anxieties and resentments of a defeated nation. In February 1920, Hitler orchestrated the renaming of the DAP to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, commonly known as the Nazi Party. At this meeting, Hitler presented the 25-point program, a platform he co-authored with Drexler. It was a potent blend of nationalist, anti-Semitic, and anti-capitalist demands, calling for the repudiation of the Versailles Treaty, the unification of all Germans into a greater Germany, the denial of citizenship and civil rights to Jews, and the nationalization of corporate trusts. He also designed the party's symbol, the swastika, or Hakenkreuz, inside a white circle on a red background. The red represented the social movement. The white represented nationalism, and the swastika represented the struggle for the victory of the Aryan race. By July 1921, Hitler had made himself indispensable to the party. He used an ultimatum to oust Drexler and assume absolute leadership, becoming the Vorsitzender, or chairman, with dictatorial powers. He established the Führer principle, the leader principle, which dictated that all authority flowed from the top down, demanding total obedience from subordinates. This was a crucial step in transforming a small political group into a monolithic, authoritarian movement. To protect Nazi meetings and disrupt those of political opponents, Hitler established the Sturmabteilung, the SA, or stormtroopers, in 1921. Led by Ernst Röhm, these brown shirts used violence and intimidation as central political tools. They were the muscle of the early Nazi movement, embodying the street-level thuggery that would characterize their rise. By late 1923, Germany was experiencing severe hyperinflation, and French troops had occupied the Ruhr region due to unpaid reparations. Hitler believed the Weimar Republic was on the verge of collapse. Inspired by Benito Mussolini's successful March on Rome in 1922, Hitler decided to launch a coup d'état in Munich. On the evening of November 8, 1923, Hitler and the SA, along with famed World War I General Erich Ludendorff, stormed a political rally at the Bürgerbräukeller beer hall. Hitler fired a pistol into the ceiling, declared a national revolution, and forced Bavarian state leaders to support his plan to march on Berlin. The next morning, November 9th, Hitler led 2,000 armed Nazis through the streets of Munich toward the War Ministry. However, the police remained loyal to the state. At the Odeonsplatz, state police opened fire on the marchers. 16 Nazis and 4 police officers were killed. Hitler fled the scene with a dislocated shoulder, but was arrested 2 days later and charged with high treason. This event, known as the Beer Hall Putsch, was a spectacular failure, but it proved to be a political turning point for Hitler. His trial in February 1924 became a national stage. Instead of defending himself against treason charges, he used the courtroom as a national megaphone to attack the Weimar Republic, condemn the Versailles Treaty, and proclaim his innocence in the eyes of history. The sympathetic, right-wing judges allowed him to speak at length, turning the trial into a propaganda triumph. Though found guilty, he was sentenced to the minimum term of 5 years at Landsberg prison, but served only 9 months before being released on parole. Living in highly comfortable conditions, receiving floods of visitors and gifts. While in Landsberg, Hitler dictated the first volume of his ideological manifesto, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, to his loyal secretary, Rudolf Hess. The book combined autobiography with a detailed exposition of his fanatical worldview. It laid out his core ideological pillars, the belief that mankind is divided into a hierarchy of races, with Aryans as the creators of culture and Jews as the destroyers, leading to a target destination of racial purification and segregation. It also introduced the concept of Lebensraum, or living space, arguing that Germany needed to conquer Eastern Europe and Russia, eradicating Slavic populations to make room for German settlers. And finally, anti-communism, viewing Marxism as an international Jewish conspiracy to enslave the world, thus justifying the destruction of the Soviet Union. Mein Kampf was not just a book, it was a blueprint for future atrocities, a chillingly explicit declaration of intent. Following his release in December 1924, Hitler faced a changed political landscape. The Nazi Party had been banned during his imprisonment, and he was prohibited from speaking publicly in Bavaria and several other German states until 1927. The German economy was also stabilizing under the Dawes Plan, and inflation was curbed. Hitler realized that another violent coup would fail. He adopted a new strategy, the strategy of legality. The Nazis would use the democratic processes of the Weimar Constitution, elections, propaganda, and parliamentary seats, to destroy the Weimar Republic from within. "If voting takes longer than shooting," he famously remarked, At least the results are guaranteed by their own constitution. He refounded the NSDAP in February 1925, asserting absolute control over regional leaders, or Gauleiter, to ensure his personal security and create an elite guard loyal to him over the unruly SA. He formed the Schutzstaffel, the SS, in 1925, appointing Heinrich Himmler to lead it in 1929. Despite these efforts, during the prosperous late 1920s, the Nazi Party remained a marginal radical group, winning only 2.6% of the vote in the 1928 Reichstag elections. It seemed for a brief moment that the Nazi threat was contained. But then came the turning point, the path to the chancellorship, from 1929 to 1933. The Wall Street crash of October 1929 ended Germany's economic recovery, triggering the Great Depression. American banks withdrew loans from German institutions, causing industrial production to drop, businesses to collapse, and unemployment to climb to over 6 million people by 1932, nearly one-third of the workforce. This economic crisis quickly became a political one. The coalition governments of the Weimar Republic were unable to agree on unemployment relief, leading to frequent collapses of the cabinet. Chancellor Heinrich Brüning began governing via emergency decrees under Article 48 of the Constitution, bypassing the Reichstag and weakening democratic norms. The system was crumbling from within, creating a vacuum that Hitler was perfectly positioned to fill. Hitler capitalized on this widespread despair, panic, and anger. He hired Joseph Goebbels as Reich propaganda director, and together they ran modern, energetic political campaigns. Hitler traveled across Germany by airplane, under the slogan, "The Führer over Germany," speaking to massive crowds. His messaging was brilliant in its flexibility, shifting based on his audience. To workers, he promised jobs and economic security. To industrialists, he promised to destroy communism and curb trade unions. To nationalists, he promised to restore military power and national pride. He was everything to everyone, a chameleon of promises. This strategy produced rapid electoral gains. In the September 1930 Reichstag elections, the Nazi Party increased its seats from 12 to 107, becoming the second-largest political party in Germany. This was a massive breakthrough, a clear signal that the party was gaining mainstream traction. In the spring of 1932, Hitler ran for the presidency against the incumbent, Paul von Hindenburg. Hitler lost the election but forced a second round of voting, securing 37% of the total vote and establishing himself as a major national figure. He was no longer a fringe politician, he was a national phenomenon. In the July 1932 Reichstag elections, the Nazis peaked at 37.3% of the vote, securing 230 seats and becoming the largest party in parliament. Hitler refused to join any coalition government unless he was appointed chancellor, demanding absolute power. Hindenburg, who viewed Hitler with aristocratic disdain, famously referring to him as a bohemian corporal, repeatedly refused his demands. By late 1932, Nazi momentum seemed to slow. In the November elections, their share of the vote dropped to 33.1%, and the party faced severe financial difficulties. It seemed like Hitler might have missed his window, that his uncompromising stance had alienated potential allies. However, political instability continued. Chancellor Franz von Papen was replaced by General Kurt von Schleicher, who attempted to split the Nazi Party by offering the vice-chancellorship to Gregor Strasser, a rival of Hitler. Hitler quickly reasserted his authority and forced Strasser out of the party, demonstrating his ruthless control. It was in these backroom intrigues that Hitler's path to power was ultimately cleared, not by an electoral majority, but by conservative elites. Papen, seeking to return to power and oust Schleicher, approached Hitler. They formed an alliance. Papen convinced Hindenburg that a coalition cabinet led by Hitler but dominated by conservative ministers would isolate the Nazi leader and bring stability to the country. Papen famously and disastrously remarked, "Within 2 months, we will have pushed Hitler so far into a corner that he'll squeak." On January 30th, 1933, President Hindenburg officially appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. That evening, thousands of torch-bearing SA and SS men marched in triumph past the Reich Chancellery, celebrating what they knew was a victory far greater than anyone outside their ranks understood. Now, we enter the period of the consolidation of power, known as Gleichschaltung, from 1933 to 1934. Hitler had no intention of remaining bound by a coalition cabinet or democratic norms. He moved quickly to dismantle democratic institutions. He convinced Hindenburg to dissolve the Reichstag and call for new elections in March 1933, planning to use state resources to secure a Nazi majority. On the night of February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building in Berlin was set on fire. A young Dutch council communist, Marinus van der Lubbe, was arrested inside the burning structure. Hitler and Goebbels instantly seized the moment, claiming the fire was the signal for a communist uprising, a massive conspiracy against the state. The next day, Hitler persuaded President Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree, the Verordnung des Reichspräsidenten zum Schutz von Volk und Staat. This emergency decree suspended fundamental civil liberties, including freedom of speech, assembly, the press, and habeas corpus. It authorized the police to arrest political opponents without charge and intercept mail and phone calls. The government used these powers to arrest thousands of communists, socialists, and trade unionists, shutting down their presses and disrupting their campaigns. This was the first major step towards a police state. In the elections of March 5, 1933, despite widespread violence and voter intimidation, the Nazis failed to win an absolute majority, securing 43.9% of the vote. To gain full dictatorial control, Hitler proposed the Enabling Act, the Ermächtigungsgesetz, an amendment that would grant the Chancellor the power to enact laws without the consent of the Reichstag for 4 years, even if those laws violated the Constitution. To pass the act, Hitler needed a two-thirds majority. On March 23, the Reichstag met at the Kroll Opera House in Berlin, which was surrounded by armed SA and SS men, their presence a clear intimidation tactic. The communist delegates had already been arrested or fled. Hitler made a conciliatory speech to the Center Party, promising to respect the Catholic Church, a calculated deception. The Social Democratic Party, led by Otto Wels, was the only party to vote courageously against the measure. The Enabling Act passed by a vote of 441 to 94. It made Hitler the legal dictator of Germany, rendering the Reichstag largely ceremonial, effectively voting itself out of existence. Over the next year, Hitler systematically dismantled German democracy and civil society through a process called Gleichschaltung, or coordination. In May 1933, trade unions were banned, their assets seized, and workers forced into the Nazi-run German labor front. In June and July 1933, all non-Nazi political parties were either banned or forced to dissolve themselves, and a law declared the NSDAP the only legal political party in Germany. By early 1934, state parliaments, the Länder, were abolished, stripping Germany's regions of local autonomy and centralizing all authority in Berlin. The entire fabric of German society was being rewoven according to Nazi ideology. By mid-1934, Hitler faced an internal crisis within his movement. The SA had grown to over 3 million men. Its leader, Ernst Röhm, demanded a second revolution to implement the socialist-leaning points of the Nazi platform, and, more dangerously, that the SA absorb the regular German army, the Reichswehr, to create a people's militia. This would have put Röhm in command of Germany's entire military apparatus. The military leadership was horrified by this prospect and threatened to remove Hitler if he did not control his paramilitary force. Hindenburg was also in failing health, and Hitler needed the military's backing to succeed him as head of state. Hitler chose the army over his old paramilitary allies. Encouraged by Himmler and Hermann Göring, he fabricated evidence of an imminent coup by Röhm. Hitler struck. On the night of June 30, 1934, the night of the long knives, Hitler ordered the SS to purge the SA leadership. Rome, and dozens of SA leaders were arrested and executed without trial. Hitler used the opportunity to eliminate other conservative and political rivals, including former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher and Gregor Strasser. The official death toll was listed at 85, but historical estimates suggest up to 200 people were killed. The purge broke the power of the SA and secured the absolute loyalty of the regular military. On August 2, 1934, President Paul von Hindenburg died at the age of 86. Hitler immediately merged the offices of Chancellor and President, declaring himself Führer und Reichskanzler, leader and Chancellor. The German military was then required to swear a new oath of allegiance. Unlike traditional oaths to the Constitution or the nation, this was a personal oath of absolute obedience to Adolf Hitler as an individual. This cemented his total dictatorship. Let's delve into domestic policies and the Nazi state, from 1934 to 1939. Hitler's popularity grew significantly during the mid-1930s, largely due to Germany's economic recovery. He appointed Hjalmar Schacht, a respected banker, as Minister of Economics. Schacht implemented deficit spending programs to fund major public works projects, including the construction of the Autobahn network. This created jobs and gave the impression of a thriving economy. However, the core driver of economic recovery was rearmament. In 1935, Hitler publicly renounced the Treaty of Versailles, reintroduced conscription, and announced the creation of the Wehrmacht, the armed forces, and the Luftwaffe, the Air Force. This violated the treaty, but was met with little resistance from other European powers. In 1936, Hitler appointed Hermann Göring to head the four-year plan, which aimed to prepare the German economy and military for war by 1940. The plan focused on achieving autarky, or economic self-sufficiency, by developing synthetic alternatives for rubber, oil, and other raw materials, preparing Germany for a war of conquest. The regime maintained control through a combination of propaganda and police surveillance. Joseph Goebbels headed the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, regulating the press, radio, theater, cinema, and literature. The government subsidized cheap radios known as the Volksempfänger, or People's Receiver, ensuring Nazi broadcasts could reach nearly every home. This was a sophisticated, pervasive propaganda machine that controlled every aspect of public information. Opposition was brutally suppressed by a large police apparatus overseen by Heinrich Himmler. The Gestapo, the secret state police, operated outside the law to suppress domestic political subversion. Concentration camps were established, with the first Dachau in March 1933, initially to hold political prisoners. By the late 1930s, the system expanded under the SS Totenkopfverbände, or Death's Head units, becoming instruments of terror and extermination. Social and cultural policies aimed to create a Volksgemeinschaft, a people's community, a classless society based on racial purity. Cultural life was aligned with Nazi ideology. All independent youth groups were banned. Boys aged 10 to 18 were required to join the Hitlerjugend, the Hitler Youth, which focused on physical fitness and military training. Girls joined the Bund Deutscher Mädel, the League of German Girls, which prepared them for domestic roles and motherhood, emphasizing their role in producing more Aryan children. Women were encouraged to leave the workforce to focus on raising large Aryan families, with the state awarding the Ehrenkreuz der Deutschen Mutter, the Cross of Honor of the German Mother, to women who gave birth to 4 or more children. Hitler viewed Christianity with personal disdain, but tolerated the churches for political reasons. In 1933, the regime signed a Reichskonkordat with the Vatican, promising to respect Catholic institutions in exchange for political neutrality. A pro-Nazi faction within the Protestant Church, the German Christians, sought to align church doctrine with racial theories. However, confessing church figures like Martin Niemöller and Dietrich Bonhoeffer resisted these efforts and were imprisoned, demonstrating that even in a totalitarian state, pockets of resistance could emerge. This brings us to the core of Nazi ideology, racial ideology, and radicalization, from 1933 to 1939. Anti-Semitism was the central element of Hitler's worldview, deeply ingrained since his Vienna years. Upon taking power, his government began systematically excluding Jewish citizens from German public life. On April 1, 1933, the state organized a national boycott of Jewish-owned businesses. This was followed by the Law for the Restoration of the Professional Civil Service, which removed Jewish citizens from jobs in government, public education, and the legal system. Further decrees restricted Jewish enrollment in universities and banned Jewish doctors from treating non-Jewish patients. This was a gradual bureaucratic disenfranchisement, a chilling prelude to what was to come. During the annual party rally in September 1935, Hitler announced the Nuremberg Laws, which institutionalized the regime's racial ideology. These laws laid the legal foundation for the destruction of Germany's Jewish population. The Reich Citizenship Law, the Reichsbürgergesetz, stripped German Jews of their citizenship, reclassifying them as subjects of the state without political rights. The Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor, the Gesetz zum Schutze des deutschen Blutes und der deutschen Ehre, banned marriages and extramarital relations between Jews and citizens of German or related blood to prevent racial mixing. The laws defined a Jew based on ancestry rather than religious practice, classifying anyone with 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents as a full Jew, regardless of whether they identified with the faith. This was pseudo-scientific racism codified into law, creating a legal framework for systematic persecution. Following a brief pause during the 1936 Berlin Olympics, which the Nazis used as a propaganda spectacle, the regime accelerated the expropriation of Jewish businesses, a process known as Aryanization. Jews were barred from public recreation areas, theaters, and resorts, and were required to add the middle names Israel for men or Sarah for women to their official documents, further isolating and dehumanizing them. On the night of November 9 to 10, 1938, the regime organized a nationwide pogrom known as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. The attack was framed as a spontaneous public reaction to the assassination of Ernst vom Rath, a German diplomat in Paris, by Herschel Greenspan, a young Polish Jew. However, it was orchestrated by Goebbels with Hitler's full approval. SA and Nazi party members destroyed over 7,500 Jewish-owned businesses, burned hundreds of synagogues, and looted homes. At least 91 Jewish individuals were killed during the night, and nearly 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. The regime then blamed the Jewish community for the property damage, fining them 1 billion Reichsmarks and barring them from participation in the German economy. Kristallnacht marked a horrific escalation from discrimination to open, state-sponsored violence. The regime's racial policies also targeted other groups viewed as threats to the genetic health of the nation, including Romani people, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals. In 1933, the government passed the Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily Diseased Offspring, which led to the forced sterilization of over 400,000 individuals with mental illnesses, physical disabilities, epilepsy, or severe alcoholism. In late 1939, Hitler signed a backdated authorization establishing the Action T4 program, a secret euthanasia initiative aimed at eliminating mentally and physically disabled adults. Medical professionals murdered more than 70,000 patients using carbon monoxide gas in specialized centers. Public protests led by Catholic Bishop Clemens August Graf von Galen forced the program to halt its centralized operations in 1941, but the killings continued discreetly via lethal injection and starvation until 1945. This demonstrated the regime's chilling commitment to racial purity and its willingness to murder those deemed unfit. Let's now turn to Hitler's aggressive foreign policy and the pre-war crises from 1933 to 1939. Hitler's foreign policy aimed to reverse the Treaty of Versailles and secure Lebensraum, living space, in Eastern Europe. His strategy relied on a combination of diplomatic maneuvering, threats of force, and exploiting the anti-war sentiment of Britain and France. He knew Western powers were deeply scarred by World War I and desperate to avoid another conflict, a vulnerability he exploited with brinkmanship. In October 1933, Hitler withdrew Germany from the League of Nations and the World Disarmament Conference, signaling his rejection of international cooperation. In 1935, he publicly announced the creation of the Luftwaffe and the reintroduction of military conscription, expanding the army far beyond Versailles limits. Britain and France protested, but took no action, demonstrating the policy of appeasement was already taking hold. In March 1936, Hitler ordered a small force of German troops to march into the demilitarized Rhineland, a region forbidden to German military presence under the Versailles Treaty. His generals warned it was an immense gamble. If France mobilized, the German army would have to retreat. France did nothing, paralyzed by internal political divisions. This success boosted Hitler's confidence and solidified his domestic standing. He learned that the Western powers would not act. In March 1938, Hitler turned his attention to his birthplace, Austria. Through intense political pressure, threats of invasion, and the connivance of Austrian Nazis, he forced the Austrian government to capitulate. On March 12, German troops crossed the border, and the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria, was declared to cheering crowds in Vienna. This was a clear violation of Versailles, but was met with little more than condemnation. Hitler next targeted the Sudetenland, the German-speaking border regions of Czechoslovakia. He manufactured a crisis, claiming the Czechoslovak government was persecuting Germans. Czechoslovakia possessed a modern military and defensive alliances with France and the Soviet Union, making war look imminent. To prevent a European war, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain championed the policy of appeasement. At the Munich Conference in September 1938, Chamberlain, French Premier Édouard Daladier, and Italian dictator Benito Mussolini met with Hitler. Without consulting the Czechoslovak government, Britain and France agreed to let Germany annex the Sudetenland in exchange for Hitler's promise that this was his last territorial demand in Europe. Chamberlain famously returned to London, declaring he had secured peace for our time. Hitler broke his word within months. In March 1939, German troops marched into Prague, occupying the remainder of the Czech lands and turning Slovakia into a puppet state. The invasion of Czechoslovakia shattered the illusions of appeasement. Britain and France realized Hitler could not be appeased and issued security guarantees to his next logical target, Poland. Hitler then demanded the return of the Free City of Danzig and the Polish Corridor, which split East Prussia from the rest of Germany. To ensure he could crush Poland without facing a simultaneous war with the Soviet Union, Hitler made a pragmatic deal with his ideological archenemy, Joseph Stalin. On August 23, 1939, German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop and Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov signed the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. Publicly, it was a 10-year peace treaty. Secretly, a protocol divided Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence, paving the way for the joint destruction of Poland. With his eastern flank secure, Hitler ordered the invasion. This brings us to World War II, the zenith of conquest, from 1939 to 1941. On September 1, 1939, German forces invaded Poland under the pretext of a staged Polish attack on a German radio station at Gleiwitz. On September 3, honoring their treaties, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. The German military debuted a new operational doctrine known as Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This strategy emphasized speed, surprise, and concentrated force, using coordinated armored divisions, panzers, motorized infantry, and close air support from the Luftwaffe to bypass fortifications and encircle enemies. Poland was overwhelmed within weeks, sliced in half when the Soviet Union invaded from the east on September 17. Following a winter of inactive waiting on the Western Front, known as the Phony War, Hitler launched invasions of Denmark and Norway in April 1940 to secure northern iron ore shipping routes. On May 10, 1940, the German army launched its grand offensive in the west, invading France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Rather than attacking the heavily fortified French Maginot Line, German armored forces under generals like Heinz Guderian bypassed it completely. They drove through the rugged, heavily forested Ardennes forest, which French military planners had deemed impassable to tanks. The German army cut off and encircled British and French forces in the north. While over 330,000 Allied soldiers were evacuated from the beaches of Dunkirk, the French army collapsed. On June 22, 1940, France signed an armistice. Hitler insisted the signing take place in the Compiègne wagon, the exact railway car where Germany had signed its 1918 surrender, a symbolic act of revenge. Hitler was at the peak of his power. He had conquered France in 6 weeks, a feat that had eluded Imperial Germany for 4 years during World War I. His popularity at home was immense, and even his skeptical generals began viewing him as a military genius. Only Great Britain, under the leadership of its new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, remained in the war. Hitler expected Britain to sue for peace, but Churchill refused. Hitler ordered preparations for an invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion. To succeed, the Luftwaffe, commanded by Hermann Göring, had to destroy the British Royal Air Force, the RAF, to control the skies over the English Channel. The resulting Battle of Britain from July to October 1940 was the first major military setback of Hitler's career. The RAF, aided by radar technology and fierce determination, inflicted heavy losses on the Luftwaffe. Frustrated, Hitler shifted strategy to the nighttime bombing of British cities, known as the Blitz, in an attempt to break British civilian morale. The strategy failed, and Hitler indefinitely postponed Operation Sea Lion, turning his focus toward his ultimate lifetime objective, the Soviet Union. This brings us to Operation Barbarossa and the ideological war from 1941 to 1942. On June 22, 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. It was the largest military operation in human history, involving over 3 million German and Axis troops along an 1,800-mile front. For Hitler, this was not a conventional military campaign, but an apocalyptic Vernichtungskrieg, a war of annihilation. It was the ultimate clash between Nazi-Aryan civilization and what he termed Judeo-Bolshevik Slavic subhumans. Before the invasion, Hitler issued the Commissar Order, which instructed German troops to summarily execute all captured Soviet political commissars, explicitly violating international laws of war. Initially, the Blitzkrieg met with immense success. German panzer armies advanced hundreds of miles into Soviet territory, encircling and capturing millions of Red Army soldiers at Bialystok, Minsk, and Kiev. By autumn, Leningrad was besieged, and German advance guards could see the spires of the Kremlin through their binoculars. However, the Soviet Union did not collapse within weeks, as Hitler and his generals had confidently predicted. The vast geography, terrible road infrastructure, and a fierce Soviet resistance stretched German supply lines to the breaking point. In late November, an early, exceptionally brutal Russian winter struck. German soldiers, lacking winter uniforms, lubricants, and antifreeze, froze in their tracks. On December 5, 1941, Soviet General Georgy Zhukov launched a massive counteroffensive outside Moscow, pushing the exhausted Germans back. Hitler took personal command of the German army, firing his commander-in-chief, Walther von Brauchitsch. He issued a strict, stand-fast order, forbidding any retreats. While this order temporarily prevented a total rout, it tied the German military to rigid, inflexible positions that would prove catastrophic in the years ahead. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor. Although Hitler was not legally bound by the Tripartite Pact to assist Japan in an offensive war, he declared war on the United States on December 11th. He believed the U.S. was already fighting an undeclared naval war against Germany in the Atlantic, and underestimated American industrial power. assuming the U.S. would be tied down by a Pacific War with Japan. This decision ensured Germany's ultimate defeat by uniting the world's greatest industrial superpower, the world's largest empire, Britain, and the world's largest land nation, the USSR, against him. Now, we must confront the most horrific aspect of his legacy: the Holocaust, its radicalization and execution from 1941 to 1945. The invasion of the Soviet Union marked a horrific radicalization of Nazi racial policy. Behind the advancing German army marched specialized SS units called Einsatzgruppen, or task forces, commanded by Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich. The Einsatzgruppen, aided by regular army units and local collaborators, conducted mass shootings of Jews, communists, and Romani people. At Babi Yar, a ravine near Kiev, the Einsatzgruppen shot 33,771 Jewish men, women, and children in a single two-day operation on September 29 to 30, 1941. By the end of the war, these mobile killing squads had murdered over 1.5 million people. As the war dragged on and the numbers of Jews under Nazi control expanded into the millions, mass shooting was deemed too slow, inefficient, and psychologically draining for the executioners. Hitler sought a more systematic, industrialized solution. On January 20, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich chaired the Wannsee Conference in Berlin, where top Nazi bureaucrats coordinated the logistics for the final solution to the Jewish question, the Endlösung der Judenfrage. The plan was to deport the entire Jewish population of Europe to specialized extermination camps in occupied Poland. The Nazi regime constructed purpose-built death factories equipped with gas chambers using carbon monoxide or Zyklon B gas, alongside large-scale crematoria. The main camps included Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Belzec, Sobibor, Chelmno, and Majdanek. Jews from across occupied Europe were packed into overcrowded cattle cars and shipped to these camps. At Auschwitz, a selection process separated those capable of temporary slave labor from those sent immediately to the gas chambers. The Holocaust was a state-sponsored, bureaucratic project that utilized the entire machinery of the German state. Scientists designed the gas, corporate firms built the ovens, and the state railway coordinated the deportation schedules. Hitler rarely issued written orders for the Holocaust, preferring verbal directives delivered to Himmler. However, his speeches left no doubt about his responsibility. In his famous Reichstag speech of January 30, 1939, he had openly warned, "If international finance Jewry, inside and outside Europe, should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, the result will be not the Bolshevization of the earth, and thereby the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe." This was not a secret. It was a declared intent, chillingly fulfilled. Finally, we come to the downward spiral, military defeat from 1942 to 1944. In the summer of 1942, Hitler launched a new offensive in Russia, Case Blue, targeting the oil fields of the Caucasus and the industrial city of Stalingrad on the Volga River. The battle for Stalingrad turned into a brutal, house-to-house war of attrition. Hitler became obsessed with taking the city due to its name, refusing to listen to intelligence reports showing his flanks were vulnerable. In November 1942, the Red Army launched a massive double-envelopment counteroffensive, Operation Uranus, cutting off and trapping the German Sixth Army under General Friedrich Paulus inside the city. This was a catastrophic defeat, a psychological rupture for the German people, marking the beginning of the end. The story of Adolf Hitler is a complex tapestry woven with threads of personal failure, ideological hatred, political opportunism, and devastating violence. It's a journey from a disgruntled, rejected artist to a dictator who plunged the world into its deadliest conflict. The key takeaways from his rise are the dangers of unchecked grievance, the power of populist rhetoric to exploit societal anxieties, and the insidious nature of gradual radicalization. His early life traumas academic failures, and artistic rejections fed a deep well of resentment. This personal bitterness found a fertile ground in post-WWI Germany, a nation humiliated by defeat and crippled by economic hardship, ripe for a scapegoat. Hitler's genius, if you can call it that, lay in his ability to articulate these grievances, to simplify complex problems into easily digestible narratives of betrayal and conspiracy, and to offer himself as the sole savior. He weaponized this potent cocktail of fear, anger, and false promises to seize absolute power. It's a chilling reminder of how easily a society can be led astray when fear trumps reason and when the search for simple answers overrides critical thought. Understanding these patterns, even from such a dark chapter, is crucial for safeguarding our future.